I'm joined now by New Jersey Democratic Congressman Josh Gottheimer, former Republican Congressman Carlos Curbelo from Florida, Jennifer Rubin, opinion writer for The Washington Post, and Jonathan Lemire, White House reporter for the Associated Press. Thank you all for being with us. Congressman,
thank you.
You're the only one on this panel with a vote in this potentially, if and when it comes to that. So let me start with you. The president said today that he told those congressional leaders that he'd be willing to let this go on for months, maybe even a year. What is your, do you think it is realistically possible, this thing, we're measuring it in 2 weeks right now, is it possible this could stretch on into months?
I mean, I think that's absurd. I think what we need to do is actually stay at the table, both sides, and keep working together until we get the government reopened. And I just don't understand. We passed this week out of the House legislation to reopen the government. One of the first moves the Democrats did, and we did it this week. It's going to go to the Senate now. It's basically what they passed a couple weeks ago in a bipartisan way. It passed this week in a bipartisan way, including members of the Problem Solvers Caucus, which Carlos was a member of until recently. And I just don't see why we can't get together and get the government back open.
Well, let me ask you, is that the Democratic position now? Because it's what it sounded like listening to the Democratic leaders today, saying they went into that meeting telling the president, just reopen the government first, then have that discussion, have that negotiation over border security, fencing, wall, whatever, you know, it's going to be, whatever any side is going to want to call it there. Is the Democratic position now, though, just clean continuing resolutions to open this and no negotiation of any other sort until and unless that happens?
Well, I know what my position is. I don't know what the other positions are, but I'll tell you this. I think we should sit at the table and talk to each other. You should reopen the government because that just makes sense. It's costing us in productivity. It's costing us dollars. It's costing small businesses not getting loans here in my district. It's air traffic controllers told me the skies are at risk. So what I think we need to do is reopen the government. And then, of course, we should be talking about having tougher borders. And there's plenty of options on the table. We should continue that discussion, and we should keep working on it. There's no reason why you can't do both. And so I think it's a false choice. And I think we should do our responsibility, the right thing, which is get the government back open and work on making sure our borders are secure.
Okay, the other piece of this, one of the other pieces of this, John Lemire, you heard that clip there, the president saying there's this idea of invoking a national emergency and building this somehow by executive fiat. I know he raises this possibility of dramatic, if vague, executive action from time to time. Does this fall in the category of bluster, or is there something going on in the background here where the White House is actually prepared to try to make some kind of executive move on this?
There have been a few initial steps to look at it. It's unclear whether he actually does have the authority, whether it would be a legal thing for him to do. But I think this more falls under the category of the president sort of talking big, being presented with, wanting to present an option that is better than what he's currently faced, because he's in a little bit of a corner right now. And I think there's a growing reality in the White House that that's what's happened here, that he was, he caved to the pressure of members of the conservative media who said to him that if you take this original deal that didn't have the money for the wall, that's a loss. You're throwing away your presidency. And he balked. He had signaled he was going to sign it. He was signaled he was ready to go forward with this, and he changed his mind. And this is a moment where there are not that many Republicans. We're seeing some signs of strain in the Senate right now. Some who have said, Susan Collins and a few others, have said that they should reopen the government, that this should not be how we do this, that the border security stuff should be separate to the idea of the government being open. But the president, as he so often does, is focused almost exclusively on his base, believing that they are behind him for this fight. They think that this is why he was sent to Washington. This was his signature campaign promise. He's to upend government, and that he thinks that if he were to suddenly cave right now, he might, for the first time, risk losing even some of that support.
Well, you mentioned those Republican senators, Cory Gardner, Susan Collins. One person who was conspicuously absent from that Rose Garden today, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. According to the New York Times, quote, McConnell for the first time is facing pressure from members of his own party to step in to resolve the stalemate. But McConnell told Politico, I don't see how that leads to an outcome, and I want to get an outcome. That will be determined by the president and Senate Democrats. Here is what Trump said when asked why McConnell wasn't in the Rose Garden.
Why is he not here in the Rose Garden right now?
Because he's running the Senate. I mean, Mitch McConnell has been fantastic.
Well, Carlos Curbelo, somewhere in this chain here, House Democrats, Senate Republicans, Trump White House, there has to be some kind of give here to get the government reopened. A lot of folks are looking at the Senate right now as the most likely place for that because of that dynamic we were just talking about here. Some of these Republicans, maybe who are up in 2020, who are more from swing states, Do you think that's a realistic possibility, that there will be pressure, political pressure from Republicans on the Senate side that budges this along?
I think it is a possibility, Steve. When we think about what's happened here, both sides in this conflict have kind of locked themselves into a labyrinth and turned off the lights. And I think there's one obvious way out. It's something Josh and I worked on in the 115th Congress, and that is a compromise on immigration, probably the most divisive issue in our country right now. There's a very elegant compromise out there that's been staring at members of Congress and the administration for 2 years, and that is more border security to fight drug trafficking and human trafficking at the southwest border, combined with a permanent solution, a path to citizenship for DACA dreamers, for the young immigrants brought to our country as children. You're hearing more and more talk about this. Lindsey Graham is expressing a willingness to engage in this discussion. Vice President Pence has said this is a possibility. I think this is the obvious way out of this conflict where both sides can claim victory, because otherwise the only way out is for one side to appear to capitulate before the country. We know the president is in no mood to do that, and certainly Democratic leaders in the House and Senate aren't either. So I think that's the answer. And people in Congress need to listen to members like Josh Geitheimer and others, problem solvers, who can make these deals happen, who can sit at the table and actually find some consensus here. That's what I think is needed.
That possible compromise you're talking about, and yes, it has been floated before, did come up in the Rose Garden today, that possibility of DACA for border security, fence, wall, again, whatever anybody would end up calling it. The president seemed to be saying that court rulings last year had changed his thinking on that, but that does continue, the possibility does continue to linger out there that might ultimately be some kind of resolution here. But Jennifer Rubin, let me ask you about this as well. Obviously, political calculations here enter into the posture on any side. If somebody is feeling in a government shutdown the political heat we've seen in the past, that's always when that side will end up folding. Democrats, it doesn't seem, are feeling much political heat right now in terms of their posture on the House side. I'm wondering, just watching the president with that sort of stream of conscious press conference there in the Rose Garden today, the thought occurred to me more than once that he himself, I don't know about his party, but he himself might be enjoying this standoff.
I don't know if he's enjoying it or not. He certainly was incoherent, however. And if he's going to bring up these mysterious powers that he apparently has, he might want to ask the historians who were there when Harry Truman was in office and tried to seize the steel mills, and the Supreme Court said, no, you don't have these secret emergency powers. But he really is in a box, and I don't think it's fair to say that both sides are in a box. The Democrats are in the catbird seat right now. They voted to open the government. They're going through their agenda. They're going to push a whole bunch of bills onto the doorstep of Mitch McConnell. And what is Mitch McConnell doing? Nothing. I don't think that's a sustainable position for him or his members. Listen, he's a part of the first branch of government, too. And for him to sit back and say, I have no role here, I'm just a minion of the presidency and the White House, degrades the office that he has and degrades the United States Senate. So I think he's going to have to get off his backside and get into this. Why doesn't he vote on the bill that came over, or make changes to that bill and send it back, or put his own bill on the floor? Well, he's being entirely, at this point, passive, in part, I grant you, because he doesn't know what Trump is going to do. But you know what the solution to that is? The Congress makes a deal, they pass laws, they send them to the White House, and the executive branch decides if he's going to sign or veto them. That's how the system's supposed to work. The system is not supposed to work that the Senate gums up the works or the House gums up the works in order to protect the president from having to do anything. That's just not our system of checks and balances. And I don't think doing nothing is a solution for Mitch McConnell.
Carlos Curbelo, let me ask you about that, because you know a little bit from the inside there on the Republican side on Capitol Hill how the thinking goes on these things. Try to put yourself, you're out of office now, maybe you could be a little bit more expansive in your thoughts here, but try to put yourself politically in the shoes of Mitch McConnell right now, who all the reporting suggests feels he got burned by the White House a couple weeks ago on this. He's got some members, a Cory Gardner from Colorado, who are starting to get politically uncomfortable. What is the play here for McConnell?
Well, I think you're exactly right, Steve. McConnell did get burned, and one thing that I learned about Mitch McConnell is that he only gets burned once on one issue, on any one issue, and I don't think he's going to proceed until he's sure that whatever the solution is can pass the House, can pass the Senate. Obviously, that means 60 votes, and get the president's signature. So I think in this case, Senator McConnell's really doing the best anyone could, given his position, which is just to encourage the White House and Democrats, both in the Senate and in the House, to negotiate until there's something that's amenable to all parties. And again, I think the only such solution is that DACA plus border security compromise. And I don't really see Senator McConnell moving. And part of the story here, Steve, is that the country has grown so numb to these shutdown situations. You look at the financial markets, they're kind of ignoring it. I think most Americans are ignoring this situation, obviously with the exception of the federal workers who are suffering through this. But the country is so sick of this shutdown drama. So many people don't take it seriously anymore. It's just another example, an indication of how far our politics have fallen in this country.
I just think that's totally wrong.
Just quickly, I just want to get... Well, let me, one quick thing here. I want to just follow up, though, on this. Realistically, this idea, again, former Congressman Curbelo is putting it out there, DACA, border security deal. In terms of the White House's posture on this, we heard what the president said publicly today. Privately, is there any movement there?
There's been at least a rekindling of some discussion. In fact, it was telling last night, people I talked to close to the White House noticed that Sean Hannity on Fox News, who frankly sometimes acts as an unofficial White House spokesman, floated this very idea on his show last night. The question is, was that a float with the president's blessing, or was that his attempt to steer the president in a certain way, which we know sometimes advisors to Donald Trump find the best way to advise him is to do so through television. This is something that the president himself they were considering this deal, let's remember, last year, a similar structure, and then, of course, as he said today, the court stepped in and he sort of turned on it. They're not actively seeking out this deal, but I don't think they have ruled it out entirely just yet. It's going to depend on where else this goes in the next few days and weeks.
Okay. Thank you to Congressman Josh Gottheimer from New Jersey, former Congressman Carlos Curbelo from Florida, Jennifer Rubin from the Washington Post, and Jonathan Lemire. Coming up, Nancy Pelosi, the most powerful Democrat in American politics right now. MSNBC's own Joy Reid sat down with the new Speaker of the House today. She's here to give us a preview. Plus, are vulnerable Republican senators feeling any political heat to reopen the government? I'm going to head over to the big board. We're going to break down some interesting numbers there and more from the Rose Garden today, where President Trump said the shutdown could last months or even years. Are the American people going to be okay with that? And finally, let me finish tonight with Democrats and the I word. This is Hardball, where the action is.